This is episode 49 of the Illinois Nutrient Loss Reduction Strategy podcast, the Inflation Reduction Act. I'm University of Illinois Extension's Todd Gleason. Democrats, in a bipartisan way, meaning without any support from Republicans, passed legislation during the summer of 2022, which included $18 billion with a B dollars in conservation funding. President Joe Biden signed it into law. This extra money is to be spent on existing USDA conservation programs over a 10-year period. Today we'll explore which programs will benefit and how this extra funding might complicate the continued existence of them over time. We'll start with which programs are eligible for the extra dollars. I spoke with Illinois State Conservationist Ivan Dozier not long after the Inflation Reduction Act became law. He's since retired.
Well, I think it's always exciting when we see major pieces of legislation like this that includes conservation and conservation in names of programs that we all recognize, and we know that we have a lot of interest in conservation from our Illinois farmers, and just the opportunity to see. We've known that they can do a lot of things to help on a larger scale. So to see this come out of major legislation like this, agriculture. Most of our programs, our conservation programs, they're voluntary, and the dollars go directly to the farmers to help them put conservation on the land, and so it's through programs like the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, the Conservation Stewardship Program, the Regional Conservation Partnership Program, and then also our Agricultural Conservation Easement Programs. Those four solid programs that have been around for a long time. Farmers are familiar. Sign-ups are continuous, so we don't even have to wait on all the details. If people are interested, doesn't take any kind of a risk to come in, say you're interested in the programs, and get your name on the list, and hopefully we can make a difference.
These are cost-share programs that help producers install what kinds of things?
That's right. So the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, we used to call it our Fix-It program. It's the thing that helps those farmers that have existing resource issues, whether it be erosion or nutrient management, even livestock facilities. And then the stewardship program, the Conservation Stewardship Program, is there for farmers that have been practicing conservation, and they're going to continue to do those things and add a few more. And then the Regional Conservation Partnership Program, there's where our partners get into the act and they help us target these dollars to specific areas or specific resources. So a really good thing for partners when you can leverage some of these funds. And then the easement programs, they're longer term, returning lands to wetlands, returning grasslands, and then also just preserving farmland from encroachment, from urban sprawl. So all good active programs that have been around for a while. Our people are ready to hit the ground if people come in and have questions about them.
Clearly, farmers, landowners will understand how the programs work mostly, and that they are doing some cost sharing with the government in some cases, and they get a benefit from that. What does the taxpayer do as a benefit?
That's an excellent question, and that's why we always say that when you do conservation practices that help give you cleaner air, cleaner water, balanced habitat for wildlife, there's where the entire public benefits. And that's why it's in legislation like this when we look at really literally global issues that agriculture can have, not only an impact on the ag industry, but a greater impact beyond that helps the general public.
Is there a backlog of folks waiting for some of these funds that this will help to clear?
I wish I could tell you that there wasn't a backlog, but there is. There's never enough funds to go around. We always say to have a real impact, whether it's the hypoxic zone or even if we talk about climate, we know the practices that have a positive impact. And we know they work. We just need more of them, and a significant amount more. And the farmers in Illinois, the fact that we have a backlog shows that they're interested, they want to do things, and it also demonstrates that these funds will be wisely used.
Sometimes when there's a flush of cash that comes into any kind of organization or to a particular set of taxpayers, that means that sometime in the future they may be in trouble. The 2023 Farm Bill is coming up. These conservation programs are part of it. Is there worry that this will offset dollars that would have been allocated in that particular piece of legislation anyway?
So I think that's always a thing. Anytime you talk about legislation that would come up, the Farm Bill is up in 2023, September of 2023. So having these existing programs right now so we can hit the ground running, I think is good. And then, yes, definitely, I think there's going to be a lot of discussion as to how these dollars will fit into maybe new programs that are customized more directly to achieve these goals. I definitely think they'll be part of that discussion next year.
That was the Illinois State Conservationist Ivan Dozier, recorded during the summer of 2022. He has since retired from the Illinois Natural Resources Conservation Services. Dozier, at the time, suggested that the $18 billion in conservation funding included in the Inflation Reduction Act might spawn discussions of new programming as Congress begins the task of creating the recurring legislation referred to generically as the Farm Bill. Maybe even probably, but if that is the case, it's likely, as you'll hear from University of Illinois Agricultural Policy Specialist Jonathan Koppas, it will come at an offsetting cost. He'll explain that too in a moment, but first he has this quick reminder of how bills become laws.
If we think about our Schoolhouse Rock themed path to a farm bill, we know we got to start in the committees, at the House and Senate Ag committees. What Schoolhouse Rock doesn't tell you is that the CBO baseline is a huge driver of things, and so we're waiting for that information to come out and be updated. If we get out of committee, we're on the floors. If we get past the floors, we're in conference, and if that all works, then eventually we get back through the floors and on to the president.
Schoolhouse Rock does not talk about the Congressional Budget Office or CBO baselines. In the end, it is simple math, but hard to get to. CBO calculates how much is likely to be spent under the current law and compares that to how much the proposed changes, if enacted, would cost over time. That's not new. However, Jonathan Koppas says there are some unique things surrounding the 2023 Farm Bill debate, including the conservation spending in the Inflation Reduction Act and the ongoing battle over the debt ceiling.
From a Farm Bill perspective, it is really a potential disruptive aspect that we don't know how the consequences of it will play out. So even if they raise the debt ceiling, if we look at the 2011 debate that got derailed also by a debt ceiling dispute, much of the cuts that came out as part of the 2014 Farm Bill were a result of those debt ceiling negotiations. So it isn't just that we're watching to see if Congress raises the debt ceiling without causing massive economic catastrophe, but whether there are consequences or negotiations produce some sort of effort to cut spending or drive down some of the programmatic outlays.
We've heard these already, but let's go back through the suite of existing conservation programs which received additional funding under the Inflation Reduction Act. Some in Congress could use the IRA funding as an excuse to eliminate line items in the 2023 Farm Bill altogether or to reallocate the funds. We'll get back to that. First, Koppas adds some details to each of the programs.
The big ticket item is the Conservation Reserve Program, running at roughly 22 million acres and about $2 billion a year in the out years. It is followed in size by the Environmental Quality Incentives Program. Of course, CRP, sorry, I should mention. The CRP, of course, is the land retirement, temporary retirement, long-term 10-year contracts to put acreage under conservation cover rather than production. EQIP is the Environmental Quality Incentives Program. That is the direct cost share assistance to the farmer for adopting conservation practices on that farm. So this goes for everything from adopting cover crops to improving your manure management if you got a livestock operation, to establishing fences and dealing with irrigation challenges and so forth. So that's the second largest program. That's a working lands conservation program. So that assistance goes to farmers who are still in production as compared to CRP, which takes land out of production. And then CSP, the Conservation Stewardship Program. This is the 5-year annual contract. To qualify for the program, you have to be meeting certain levels of conservation. And then you're going to agree over the life of that 5-year contract to improve and expand upon that conservation across your entire farm. And so Again, this is an annual contract payment for conservation on working lands as well. ACEP is the Agricultural Conservation Easement Program. So these are conservation easements placed on land that run with that land, are typically long-term or permanent changes. So this is often for things like maintaining or reestablishing a wetland on the farm, or some of the farmland protection policies that help put easements on farmland to protect it from developmental pressures. So you think urban sprawl, suburban sprawl protections. And then the Regional Conservation Partnership Program was created in the 2014 Farm Bill. It works across these types of policies and programmatic issues, and it combines public-private funding. So private partners come in and help fund conservation on a regional scale. So maybe we're looking at an Upper Mississippi River Basin effort, or a Great Lakes effort, or out west a Colorado River conservation effort that would be on a regional basis, that we can get private partnership funding to help both implement the program, but also help fund the conservation practices on the farm. And so roughly, when we look into the out years, we're topping $6 billion a year in conservation. As will often be said in hearings on this, this is understood to be the single largest federal investment in conservation on private lands. So these programs typically have a lot of support, but the challenge again being the baseline issues in increasing anything there.
This is where the Inflation Reduction Act comes in.
So in August of 2022, Congress passed through budget reconciliation procedures, which allows them to bypass some of the rules, such as the Senate's filibuster and 60-vote threshold requirements that really can bog down legislation. But it means it passed on a party line basis, and it was signed into law in August. It was a massive bill with funding all across different areas. There's a lot of focus on climate, healthcare, and some tax policy changes, but tucked within this is something very important for the Farm Bill. So for fiscal years 2022 through 2025, the Inflation Reduction Act, and this might be offset by a year, should go to 26. The Inflation Reduction Act appropriated large additional amounts of funding for EQIP, for CSP, for the easement program, and the Regional Conservation Partnership Program. The total appropriation exceeded $18 billion over this time frame. This is not baseline funding. This was a separate appropriation. So we have these programs, they have permanent funding through the Commodity Credit Corporation. That is baseline. The Inflation Reduction Act provided this additional appropriation. It's a multi-year appropriation. The authority extends through 2031, so they have time to spend it, but it is not a baseline change. And so CBO will not be considering that in the Farm Bill baseline for 2023 looking forward, which means it also is not part of that baseline negotiation and calculation the same way. So I want to be clear that this additional funding exists on top of or in addition to the baseline funds in a Farm Bill.
The $18 billion from the Inflation Reduction Act is a separate pot of money from that which is allocated for the Farm Bill. However, some in Congress might use that money again as a way to get to different goals. For instance, reducing the debt or finding a different way to allocate those dollars.
The number one thing we have to know that this means for a Farm Bill is that this is not baseline money. This is not going to be subject to the baseline estimates, and it isn't available within that baseline. But it is spending that is out there and is estimated. How CBO puts this into its baseline forecast, or how it writes this and shows this, I do not know. But what we see are these amounts. So when you total this up, it actually comes out to probably roughly $15 billion in spending through 2031. Now, for a Farm Bill, while this money is not within the baseline, it is appropriated dollars that are available. If Congress so chose, you could write legislative text that rescinded some part or all of the appropriated amount, capture that savings as an offset maybe, and re-spend it somewhere else.
What's not clear at this point is how the Congressional Budget Office, CBO, will capture the $15 billion in spending over the 10-year time period and then potentially reallocate it if legislation is put forward into a 5-year farm bill.
So the rough answer to the questions is yes, it's not in the baseline, but it is additional funding that may be available to be rescinded or cut as an offset. But there's a whole lot of unknown about how exactly that would work, how much savings you can get as an offset, and how it will then factor into the baseline scoring analysis that CBO will do.
Here's one way that this could all play out, and remember, this is just a total guess on Jonathan Koppas's part.
So you can just imagine that somebody looking at this says, oh, there's a $15 billion offset sitting there. All I got to do is rescind so I want to create a new program in Title I, for example, and it's going to cost me $1 billion a year, so I'll just cut IRA money and repurpose it for that program. Of course, if somebody's thinking that, somebody else is thinking about using it for something else. And so you can see this being spent 4, 5, and 6 times over if you're not careful. So it's kind of almost a little bit of a trap in that sense that, it can feed an over expectation of being able to use it for an offset. To your question, it gets even more dicey if somebody's looking at this and saying, well, conservation's got all this additional funding, so EQIP doesn't need the $2 billion it's authorized to have now. Let's go cut EQIP in the baseline. That's a 10-year save, and they can deal with it through this.
They could, but it has an additional consequence.
That's absolutely correct, because the problem under the baseline statute in the books, these are permanent funded matters. So what you change in the baseline runs permanently. So if you cut EQIP, it will then be incorporated over, the life of that program. And so it could become a much larger reduction if somebody went after, say, the EQIP baseline dollars to offset something else because they think this Inflation Reduction Act fills it up. I think it's more likely that the political pressure is on the Inflation Reduction Act funding itself than it would be under the baseline of conservation programs. But look, in our current political environment, there's a whole lot of possibilities here that we don't know about, and it remains to be seen.
Given all of that, the conservation funding included in the Inflation Reduction Act, the battle over the debt ceiling in Congress this year, and the Farm Bill, which is in play right now, Jonathan Koppas is still hopeful because he says conservation is something that everyone supports.
Conservation programs and policies have largely been bipartisan. They've been out of the partisan fray for the most part. They're strongly supported across farming and farm interests. They're strongly supported outside of farming. They make for a really valuable sort of political bridge to those who are not in farming to understand some of the things we're doing to help farmers. And of course, they help everybody. If clean water is a benefit for everybody. Reducing soil erosion benefits both the farmers and, we don't have to clean those soils out of rivers and waterways. So it would be really unfortunate, I think, if conservation policy became much more partisan because of this situation. So it's something to watch for and watch out for. And hopefully we don't see it degenerate further.
Jonathan Koppas is an agricultural policy specialist on the Urbana-Champaign campus of the University of Illinois in the College of Agricultural, Consumer, and Environmental Sciences. You've been listening to episode 49 of the Illinois Nutrient Loss Reduction Strategy podcast, the Inflation Reduction Act. Our program was produced in cooperation with University of Illinois Extension. Special thanks go to both Nicole Haverback and Rachel Curry. I'm University of Illinois Extension's Todd Gleason.